This is the video lecture for Jewish comics. What you're going to have to do is pause the lecture after I introduce each one of these comics and then read it yourself. You might have to scroll or wait for me to scroll a little bit so that you can read each of the pages and then pause again. So what we're going to do today is we're going to basically just go and read through some comics to give you an idea of Jewish comic books and the kind of content that was included in them. Now, comics have been around for more than 100 years, certainly, and the Jewish community was always part of it, both in terms of being artists and writers and in terms of the content being directed to the Jewish community. So here we see a Yiddish comic. Actually, the top is not the correct caption. The title here is Before and After the Wedding by Zuni Maud. This is from the Forwards, and it was published on December 10th, 1916. The Forwards was a Yiddish daily newspaper established in 1897. It was a socialist newspaper. And what we have here is Zalman talking with his fiancée, and this is, of course, going right to left. Hebrew and Yiddish is read right to left, so this comic is also read right to left. So the right panel is the two of them talking, everything is lovely, we're going to treat each other like little doves, it says, and after she's talking at him, and he sits silently bored, and later on she talks and talks while he jumps up and down. And the neighbors listen, and she says, "You should rot like a dead creature and break down like a watch," which is a typical Yiddish curse. The next one that we're going to take a look at, this also comes from a Yiddish newspaper, from a newspaper called Größer Kundus, and it was drawn by Lola. That's the name that you see in the bottom right. That was Leon Israel, and this was published in 1911. And this was also a Yiddish language satirical weekly paper that was published from 1909 to 1927, and it was in opposition to the Forwards, which was much more of a serious newspaper. This newspaper, though, at its largest circulation, had 35,000 subscribers. And this one is called Between Pharaohs, and of course it's referring to the Pharaoh in Egypt, and then the sweatshop boss. And the caption at the bottom says, "Jews once worked for me in Egypt, but never like that," meaning that the kind of sweatshop labor is even worse than what the Jews experienced in Egypt. Now this one is also from Größer Kundus, also drawn by Lola in 1911, and this is called She Recognizes a Need Not to Forget, and this is in the wake of the 1911 New York Triangle Fire. If you don't know about the Triangle Fire, you should look it up on Wikipedia. And it says, "Working class, where would they come from and who would they be? They are my victims. Oh, I recognize them. I recognize them." So the people that died in this fire were immigrants, largely Jewish immigrants who no one really cared about, but certainly someone cares about them. And then here is a comic about it, and you can, I think, find this online. I only have the first page here, but basically it tells the story of the Triangle of Fire. So you can pause and read that. Now this one is actually a recent comic from 1983 by Sharon Rudahl from Women's Comics number 5. And she was a leader in the underground comics movement. And so you can just kind of read this, both in the Yiddish and in the English. Now this is very interesting. This is a comic about Leo Fuchs. Leo Fuchs was a Yiddish film star who started out in the Yiddish theater and made the break into movies. If you go on YouTube, you should be able to find the video of Leo Fuchs in the movie is Wanna Be a Boarder. And basically what happens is this is a little bit of that movie where he has a dream and he dances. And he was set up as the opposite to some of the amazing dancers such as Fred Astaire. And if you can find this movie, it's really incredible the way he moves his body. And then we have Paper Rags from New American Splendor Anthology in 1993. And this is an idea about how people who were part of Yiddish life and Jewish life in the early part of the 19th century, middle part of the 19th century, were starting to die and slip away. And so Harvey Pekar, who lived from 1939 to 2010, he does a little autobiographical thing, or not autobiographical, but biography of his father. Now, this was drawn by R. Crumb, who is not Jewish, although his wife was Jewish, or is Jewish, I should say. And Pekar, his parents were from Poland. His father was a Talmudic scholar, and in fact, his first language growing up was Yiddish. And the series that he wrote, American Splendor, was an autobiographical series about daily life. And so there's the first page and the second page. Now, I'm going to pause right now to remind you that you should be reading Will Eisner's graphic novel Coqueline, and to make sure that you participate in the discussion board about that. Now, here is Rube Goldberg. Rube Goldberg lived from 1883 to 1970, and he was an engineer who did reflections on the silliness of modern society's obsession with progress, and he worked for the San Francisco Chronicle. And by 1915, he was earning $2 million a year for the syndication and for books. So his stuff like this ran in newspapers all across the country. Now, superheroes were also part of Jewish comics. This is from Funny Man #1. I actually have this comic book. This is my comic book that it's a picture of. And this is a very interesting story because Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who were credited here as creating Funny Man, they also created Superman. But they sold Superman to DC Comics for almost no money at all. And then he became incredibly successful, and for decades, DC Comics did not pay any royalties to Siegel and Shuster. Now, they realized by 1948 what was going on, and they tried to create another successful comic character, but it really didn't work out. And this is Funny Man. This is the first page, the creation of Funny Man. And he's, of course, modeled after, what's his name? I'm blanking on the actor's name. But certainly very Jewish, and Siegel and Shuster were also Jewish. Now, this is also Harvey Pekar, and this was drawn by Crumb and Gary Dumm. And this is an interesting kind of an autobiographical thing about Pekar's angst, you might say, and disappointment with regard to Superman comics and what really is going on with comic artists. And so there's the first panel, here's the second panel. And what makes this Jewish is the way that he talks. In the bottom right here, where he says Superman Feh. Feh is a typical Jewish or Yiddish term that means, worthless or something like that. And then here on the top right, you can see we have a number of Yiddish words. So Yiddish influences Harvey Pekar's writing to a great degree. Now sometimes comics have Jewish content which is very topical in nature. And that's the case with this artist, Eli Valley. You can Google him, V-A-L-L-E-Y, and Eli Valley. And you can read some of his other comics. This is a spoof from Mad Magazine about Hogan's Heroes. If you don't know about Hogan's Heroes, look it up on Wikipedia. It was a sitcom depicting life in a prison camp in Germany. And many of the writers and artists for Mad Magazine were Jewish, and some of them had liberated some of the camps. And so this was written by Larry Siegel. The artist is Jack Davis. Larry Siegel is Jewish, and he liberated some of the concentration camps. And he said, I saw what was going on there, and I don't like that Hogan's Heroes is making fun of it, so I'm going to make fun of it in a different way that highlights how horrible it is that Hogan's Heroes is on TV. And then here we have something dealing with race relations, which you can read. And then this one also deals with assimilation in the Jewish community. And then this is a footnote, a very interesting thing to read about Will Eisner, some background for him. And then finally, we have this from just a few years ago. This is in Mad Magazine. Al Jaffe is the artist here, and you can try to find all of the Jewish things that are here. So that's the conclusion of this video lecture, and I encourage you to mention some of these in your online discussion.